Hello, and welcome to Revamping Retirement, a podcast brought to you by Kamak Retirement Group, where we tackle the retirement plan-related issues plaguing fiduciaries and plan sponsors. Our host, Mike Webb, has more than 25 years of experience in the retirement plan industry and is a nationally recognized subject matter expert. We hope you enjoy Revamping Retirement.
Thanks, Kara. Kara McCauley, our producer as always, and welcome to another exciting episode of Revamping Retirement. Mike Webb here with a very, very special guest today. I didn't know if I could top my last podcast guest, but I'm certainly going to top it this time. This man, what can I say about him? I mean, my introduction was started a couple of years ago now, I think, about 2 years ago now, where I saw a website called That 401k Site, and it struck me as one of the most entertaining things I'd ever read on the internet about retirement. And then I was intrigued to see who was behind the website, and it turned out it was an ERISA attorney, which totally blew up my world. I'm not used to ERISA attorneys. I love them, but I'm used to them being kind of the opposite of entertaining. And then I was reading this website and going, my goodness, this is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it from an ERISA attorney. And that I found out the person who did that website was our guest today, Ari Rosenbaum. And he, among his many accomplishments, I found out not only did he run That 401k Site, but he also runs a conference, which if you think the website's entertaining, the conference is about 10,000 times as entertaining, called That 401k Conference. And I think you're going to sense a pattern here. He has a podcast called That 401k Podcast, and even a live stream that was his latest venture called That 401k Virtual Bunch. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Ari Rosenbaum. Ari, how are you doing today? Good.
How are you? Thank you for having me. It's at least I could do for my, outside of my wife, probably my number one fan. Let's not talk about my other family members, but yeah, outside of my wife, they're probably my number one fan. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, guys.
My wife, that's debatable because she'll jokingly say that after 17 years of marriage, she still doesn't know what I do. So.
Yeah, sometimes my son wanders in here and says, "What you doing, Dad?" I'm glad he's not wandering in here today, though. So,
my 15-year-old son says, "Oh yeah, 401k. Does so and so do 401k plans?" I'm like, "Okay," so he finally gets it. So
just to start things off, kind of for our audience, a lot of them probably know you, but there might be a few out there who don't, and I think it'd be good in way of background anyway, because I'm kind of fascinated by the whole thing. How in the world did you come up with, hey, I'm an ERISA attorney, but I want to engage people, and I want to come up with a website where I'll talk about things as varied as maybe, disaster movies or pro wrestling, but I'll throw in retirement plan knowledge as well. So, how did you? I mean, nobody's doing that, and how did you think of that?
It's one of those things where, again, I've been 22 years as an ERISA attorney and 10 years on my own, and you come up with some ideas and you throw them against the wall and see what sticks and what doesn't. And about 4 years ago, business wasn't going so great for some reason or other. I had like a lag. And so I said, how can I generate interest in what I do? And I said, let me come up with a website. I'll get other advisors to write or other plan providers to write, and I'll write my stuff. And we'll talk about stuff that's not with 401k plans. And the impetus for it was Bill Simmons. He at that time had Grantland, and now he's got what do we call that one? The Ringer. Yeah. And that was really the template, where he talks about sports, but he talks about movies, he talks about anything under the sun. They even talk about politics, and that was kind of and of course I'm not going to talk about politics, but that was the template of where I would jump from. Like, oh wow, what if we did something like this, and it would just be 401k plans, but other stuff out of it. And then after that, the conferences came out of that as well. So it was an idea. I haven't got as many other people to write for it. I think that's partly my fault, over the last couple of years where, there was some writing that was not mine at the beginning, but it's something that's kind of lagged that I really should push out again.
Well, I think part of the beauty of the site, though, is that, it's you. It's the kind of site we get a little bit of an insight. Hey, this is not, when you read a law firm's blog, it's just like really, I mean, I'm into this stuff and I get bored sometimes. But when I read your stuff, I never get bored. And I feel like I know you, I don't know you intimately, but I feel like I know you a little bit better than a typical ERISA attorney because I know some of your interests. And to me, that's so different.
Some people would say that that's a bad thing. Like, there are other ERISA attorneys and we don't really care what their views are about other things. But to me, it was all, I talk probably too much about in my experience, as the lowly associate at a law firm and that kind of stuff. But I think it's, I always tried to humanize myself in terms of, people, it's a connection business. And, if I can say my struggles, well, I was an associate and they didn't want to work with me and I tried to get client. I just wrote another article about it. And of course, I talked about it again, dealing with plan providers and kind of what they forget. But it's a connection business. So it's like, oh, well, if Ari, years ago when I first started writing for my own firm and you talk about Caddyshack and this and that, and it really was a hook to get people in there. And you can, I certainly couldn't do that if I was still at a law firm. But to me, that was all what it is. It's all connecting to, putting, like I said, humanizing me, making connections. Oh, I went through that same thing. Or, I watch disaster movies too. And, the When Time Ran Out really stunk, with Paul Newman and Jacqueline Bisset. Whatever it is, it's a connection business. And that's what, to me, is always what the retirement plan business is. And if somebody's going to hire me because they liked what I wrote about Caddyshack, well, great. But, I guess on the flip side, people don't do that. It reminds me of the Flintstones tie that I wore in my first year of law school in moot court, and the second year law student says, "Oh, you shouldn't be wearing a Flintstones tie to court." Okay, whatever. Now, I always bring that up, but yeah,
it's an interesting dichotomy. Yeah, I mean, to me, you gotta get your brand out there. That's first and foremost.
You got to get your brand out there.
You do it in a spectacular way.
Listen, ERISA is a very difficult subject, and I worked for a year for a union law firm, and the woman who was the ERISA attorney is utterly brilliant. But the way she wrote was, I always felt like it was just a way to justify our fees. If I speak on such a, not the King's English, but in a legalese, then I could, use that to support my $500 an hour. And to me, it was always easier. And again, it's a connection business. If I write something in a language that plan sponsors and other plan providers can understand, well, I think that's the better route, because, no advisor is, really have an ERISA background, except, a former boss of mine. But outside of that, I mean, you're not expected to be ERISA experts. And so, let me speak it in a language that you can understand.
Yeah. And, I've actually kind of, and you've seen this in my writing, I've tried to emulate you in a little bit from the advisor perspective. I'm not as witty as you, so I can't emulate that. But I do.
I would say I'm that witty. I just, there's.
Oh, you're witty.
There's certain things like, I'm fascinated by, and I will, like right now, what am I fascinated by? I'm fascinated by the fall back in the 80s. The fall intros for network TV, they would all do like a fall promo, and it'd be like a song and dance thing. And I'm just very, very fascinated by that, especially ABC in the 80s. I mean, some of that stuff is just really funny, because it's one of the things about TV these days. It's all, fragmented, that you can't have these really outlandish song and dance routines about the, network's fall schedule.
And that's what and it's interesting you mentioned that, because there's also a nostalgia trigger in a lot of what you do. Like, you remind me of things that I forgot, like that I witnessed in 1979 or 1985 that I've completely forgotten till now.
And
that's kind of cool.
I mean, again, that's what part of the shtick is, as they say. I mean, one of my favorite Twitter handles is Super 70 Sports, that guy, and he just brings these. I guess I write Arissa in the way he like puts on Twitter about all these really funny things that you completely forgot about, and I was like, wow. But like I said, that's all it is. It's just connecting with the audience. And most people in the retirement plan business are kind of our age. 10 years from now, I'm going to have a problem. I'm going to have to be, I wouldn't know how to relate to people, especially like in music these days. And I mean, I didn't watch the Emmys because there wasn't a show that I watch that gets, other than Better Call Saul, there's not a show I watch that gets nominated. So, I may have a sort of a short shelf life, as they say.
And even I find even some of the younger people, there's a connection to nostalgia too. You mentioned Super 70 Sports because they've been doing kind of a series of tweets on John Amos lately, and one of my son's favorite shows is Good Times. So like
John Amos, I always say that was always a favorite show of mine. WPIX Channel 11 here in New York used to always show it during the afternoons, and I want to say that is one of the most senseless deaths in TV history is James Evans. It was just so like unnecessary, and if you look at why John Amos left the show and got fired, he was actually right, but and the show was never the same after he was killed off.
And I think it's all that stuff to me is what makes you really stand out, in the world of ERISA attorneys. I mean, it's just this kind of stuff. But I think we'd be remiss. I think we could go on all day and talk about Good Times and other 70s and 80s kind of stuff. But I think we'd be remiss in not talking a little bit about retirement plans, since this is the Revamping Retirement podcast, although we're revamping it by not talking about retirement. But let's talk about some of the hot issues. The DOL seems to be rushing about everything to the door that they can prior to the election. Things I didn't even envision them talking about, like private equity, they've opined on, and some things that we did envision them talking about, like a fiduciary rule. Is there anything stand out in this flurry of activity as being really good or really bad, or anything you have any thoughts on?
I think a lot of that stuff, the fiduciary rule, is again something that it's just funny that the Trump White House just let that other rule under the Obama White House just die, and it was surprising how long it took them to develop a new rule. In a sense that this new rule, as I call it, the shelf life of that is really dependent on the election. It's quite possible that if Trump does lose, that rule is going to get thrown out as well. The ESG stuff and the private equity, to me, that's all political stuff. That's just political views. Just their idea that ESG funds don't return the same as other funds. And I think that's, to me, kind of questionable, because ESG could be anything. A company like Tesla is ESG. Is Tesla doing really well? I think they are. Amazon, if they go carbon neutral, as they're trying to push, is that a ESG stock? I don't know. The private equity is also interesting, because I don't think that really anybody is interested in that. Quite honestly, I don't think a lot of advisors are saying, you know what, this plan really needs it's private equity exposure. I mean, there's certainly going to be advisors who are going to try to push that. There may be mutual fund companies that are going to develop a product that we could offer in a 401k plan. But to me, it's not something that, I would say 85% of advisors said, you know what, this is what this plan really needs. It really needs a private equity exposure. I just don't see that. And again, that's another proposal. And to me, right now, as the election stands, it could go either way. It's 50-50 in my opinion. And we're only like 6-7 weeks out. So it's interesting that, we'll see what happens. I mean, everybody was for sure 4 years ago that, Hillary Clinton was going to win, that new rule at that time was going to be implemented. People spent millions and millions of dollars to comply, and look what happened, come that first Wednesday after the first Monday in November, and see what that happened. It's interesting, but that's so much part of politics.
Yeah, and that one was almost effective. We had the final rule, and it was almost effective, and it still got blown up. And at that moment, I was basically like, I'm not going to see a final fiduciary rule that's effective before I retire. And I still think that. I actually do.
I think it eventually will happen. But what's really funny is that at that time, I was working with a broker dealer, and they were just, in terms of a lot of these plans, especially the SEP and simple plans, and there was a question whether they are applicable, the DOL is applicable to them. They were just, cutting out business and saying, we can't serve this plan anymore. Go somewhere else. And it was just interesting how much business these broker dealers lost because they couldn't determine whether a plan was a SEP for one person, owner only, or it had an employee. So they were just deciding, I'm going to get out of this business. And that's, I wouldn't say it's a tragedy, but that's the cost of trying to comply.
Yeah. Speaking of compliance related rules, what if you were the king of plan sponsors? Let's just say, what compliance related issue out there, if you could change it and plan sponsors paid attention to one compliance thing tomorrow, what would you think that would be the most important thing? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
To change a rule, you're basically saying?
Yeah.
To me, I never liked the ADP rule in terms of, to me, the HCE definition is archaic in the sense that, based on the limits, if you live in the New York, New Jersey area, you're not highly compensated, I was making that kind of money 10 years ago when I was working for a firm. I mean, to me, the HCE limit should be higher, $200,000. Because I just think that, the ADP test where it limits people, limits highly compensated employees to that 2% above the NHCs. I never liked that rule because, again, I think the only people that really could afford to defer are highly compensated employees. And as long as there's, to me, kind of like a 403B universal availability type situation, do we really need the ADP? To me, it's got to be changed somewhat. And to me, the probably easiest thing to do to make me happier is to increase the HC limit.
And it's interesting you mentioned 403B because it just makes no sense to me. It's like, why do we, why not have why do we have a standard where the HCEs and 403B plans can put in whatever they want as long as we don't let everybody have the right to make elective deferrals? We're kind of moving in that direction with the new part-time rule for 401ks. It's like, why not just have the same? It just doesn't make any sense to me to have different rules.
Because the 403B was a separate, vehicle that they never put on the same level as a 401k plan, and only until recently. I mean, listen, it's only been about 8 years where the non-ERISA 403B had a written plan requirement. I mean, up until then, they could put their plan, the plan document could be on the back of a matchbook, and that's it, and that's fine. But yeah, I mean, it never made sense. But there's always been a push that 403B plans will be more and more like 401k plans, and there's quite a few nice things about 403B plans that I wish 401k plans had, which is that universal availability requirement. Yeah,
and you I think you hit the really nail on the head. I probably agree with you. That's probably the one thing I would change. And you have to explain to the clients what the ADP test entails. They never really quite understand it, and then when you used to be spread out the correct over everybody. Now you actually take it from the people who make the most.
Exactly.
So it's like it's just mind-boggling sometimes what regulation done. So I like your fell swoop. Mine might be just have a W-2 or 3401A definition of compensation across the board. I know what it would cost for everybody, but like I've seen so many plans screw up compensation definitions. It's the first thing every plan screws up.
It outside of late deferrals, it's probably the second biggest screw up I've seen of late. It's just amazing. I had a client a couple of weeks ago where bonuses weren't they didn't have a separate bonus election. They didn't have they didn't allow people to defer off of bonus, and that's a problem. And it's just amazing. Like I said, the second most frequent error I see these days is compensation. keep it simple, stupid. That's why I say, you have a car allowance, just make a contribution on the car allowance, or allow them to defer on the car allowance, or whatever it is. It's just a recipe for disaster. I think that, when you're cute and when it comes to plan provisions, that's when you're going to get plan errors.
Okay, enough about this retirement stuff. We have to talk about your wonderful collection that appears behind you, at least some of it. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but can you just show me something that's kind of cool that you have back in your collection here? Anything?
Well, listen, what do I got here? What do I think is cool? To me, I'm
not sure I understand.
Sorry, Siri. That's what happened. One of my favorite Mets of all time is Terry Leach, and Terry Leach was 87. Was a guy through sidearm, and in 87 every starting pitcher went down, and Leach went 11-1, and he was like magnificent. And this is Terry Leach used jersey. I don't even know what year this is. This looks like I think this is 87.
So wait, this was actually used by Terry Leach.
Yeah, actually it is 87 because it has the
87,
awesome. 87 tag. Actually, I have the home and road. So, when it comes to game use stuff, I don't have the Grom or whatever, but I'll have Terry Leach.
That's great, Ari. I knew you'd come through on that one, even though I put you on the spot there.
Weird stuff. I got a lot of bobbleheads and pops and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of my Mitchell Ness jerseys behind me.
Okay, now your new mission is to work Terry Leach somehow into one of your future posts, if you haven't already done that. So.
I've never done that. I don't think that it's very easy to do that. To me, it reminds me of law school. We were the first year of law school, and they had like a pool going. Like, can you get a certain word into a discussion in law school? And I remember one time it was like ukulele. And one of the students got ukulele into. I thought it was the funniest thing. Like, how do you talk property law and get ukulele in that? And the guy was like, it reminds me of the resonance of playing a ukulele. And of course, that guy right now is like a state representative in Massachusetts. But Terry Leach will be very, very difficult. But I did meet Terry Leach a couple times, which was hilarious because the first time I met him was like an 86 Mets reunion. And he was there with Bud Harrelson and Doc. And I said, Terry, I'm so excited to meet you. And he thought I was crazy. I'm like, that's like, going to a Kiss convention and being, crazy about Vinnie Vincent or something. I guess. I don't know. For those that know Kiss.
Well, for more on, well, maybe not so much on Terry Leach, because I think we've already got the best anecdote you probably have about Terry Leach. But for more on sports, pro wrestling, soap operas. Am I missing anything? General 70s and 80s pop culture, and a little retirement sprinkled in. You can catch Ari at that 401k site. I follow him, of course, on Twitter and LinkedIn. He also does that 401k conference. It's a wonderful series of conferences that if you're in this business, you should be going to, and of course his latest venture, that 401k podcast. It's been a pleasure having you today. I want to thank our special guest Ari Rosenbaum. For Carol McCauley and our entire production team, I'm Mike Webb, and this has been Revamping Retirement.
The content in this podcast is for institutional investors and plan sponsors. The information is intended to be educational and is not tailored to the investment needs of any specific investor. All examples of investor gains and losses are hypothetical and intended to illustrate the importance of early saving and consistent retirement contributions over time. Investment decisions should be based on an individual's own goals, time horizon, and risk tolerance. Nothing in this content should be considered as legal or tax advice, and listeners are encouraged to consult their own lawyer, accountant, or other advisor before making any financial decision. Thank you for listening to Revamping Retirement.